Hello, I'm James Smith. I'm lecturer in 18th century literature here at Royal Holloway, and I'm going to make some introductory comments about William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. I think one easy mistake that one can make in approaching the songs is to think that because Blake adopts a kind of simple voice, because Blake's verse form is simple and a lot of the poems are about apparently simple things, that the poems are therefore in themselves simple. Actually, I think they can be fruitfully approached as highly subtle and not always in agreement with each other. Why don't we start with the Chimney Sweeper from the Songs of Innocence. This poem, like a lot of the poems, talks about a small child, and it becomes clear, especially in some of the Songs of Experience poems, The Little Vagabond and The Little Boy Lost, for example, that Blake is especially invested in the idea that children have a way of, as it were, sort of short-circuiting adult logic. They have a way of speaking in a certain kind of innocent way that has a kind of, in Blake's eyes, radical potential. And the Chimney Sweeper can be thought of in that way. So he starts off by telling us that when my mother died I was very young, and I was sold as a chimney sweeper by my father. He then gives us this scene of all the boys who work as chimney sweepers here together, and one of them is little Tom Dacre. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head that curled like a lamb's back was shaved, so I said, "Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair." Now, Tom finds that pretty reassuring, but of course to an adult it doesn't make logical sense. How should it be reassuring that losing your hair should be a good thing because it means it can't get dirty? Well, this is an example of how Blake is invested in the idea that the voice of children can somehow short-circuit the logic of adults. So the poem starts off with this scene of reassurance. The speaker, the chimney sweeper, is reassuring little Tom Dacre. Tom Dacre then has this dream which famously involves all the children locked up in coffins and an angel coming down and releasing them so they can run and play in this idyllic green pastoral scene. Now, Tom telling that story of the dream to his fellow chimney sweepers is immensely reassuring to them, and so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark and got with our bags and brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. A second scene of reassurance. Now, there are two kind of obvious ways in which we might read that ending of the poem. On the one hand, if all do their duty, they need not fear harm, sounds incredibly naive. It sounds like Blake is encouraging us to sort of approve of these children, reassuring each other that, you know, they'll get their reward in heaven, so they can put up with any kind of mistreatment while in life and return to the work they hate so much perfectly happily. Sometimes you find readings of the poem which suggest that Blake is approving of that rather naive position. On the other hand, you get other critics or other readers who see the poem as sort of sarcastic, who see the chimney sweeper as being ironised and take it that this is a kind of satire on Christian attitudes in the late 18th century that are perfectly happy to use heaven as an excuse for mistreating children. I think that there's a third way in which the poem might be read, which is fruitful for the songs in general. I would suggest that the poem, on the one hand, approves of the kind of childlike innocent logic that, as it were, short-circuits ordinary ways of thinking. It approves of the formal fact that the chimney sweeper is able to see the idea of the hair being cut off as reassuring because the hair won't be ruined, even if it takes it that, as it were, the kind of thinking that the little chimney boy, the little chimney sweeper is doing is somehow incomplete. So, in other words, the poem doesn't altogether agree with the idea at the end that if all do their duty they need not fear harm, but it is all the same kind of interested in the possibility of thinking in a way that would allow you to reach that conclusion. Now, in order to make that a bit clearer, we might refer to a poem which is often paired with the Songs of Innocence, Chimney Sweeper one. In The Little Black Boy, we start with the boy of the title in a sort of state of misery because he is black and he sees a kind of purity in the white English child. Well, once again we have a scene of kind of reassurance which we as readers, and perhaps especially we as modern readers, have to make our minds up about what we make of it. So the little black boy's mother reassures him by saying, "We are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love, and these black bodies and this sunburnt face is but a cloud and like a shady grove. For when our souls have learnt the heat to bear, the cloud will vanish. We shall hear his, God's voice saying, 'Come out from the grove, my love and care, and round my golden tent like lambs rejoice.'" So the mother, again talking in this kind of innocent way, as you might speak to a child, is trying to reassure him that, as it were, our time on earth is spent in a state where we can barely stand the beams of God's love, and she's saying that the little black boy's blackness, his body, is there as a kind of shield or as a kind of cloud to protect him until he's able to bear it. Well, the boy then does just the same kind of innocent extrapolation that the little chimney sweeper does in the other poem. He takes this kind of logical step that no adult would be able to take. He extends the idea to this. "And thus did my mother say and kiss me, and thus I say to little English boy, when I from black and he from white cloud free, and round the tent of God like lambs we joy, I'll shade him from the heat, till he can bear to lean in joy upon our Father's knee." So the black boy takes it that, and this is not something his mother said, that the white boy's body and skin is also a kind of cloud to protect him. And he also takes it that his blackness is in some way superior to the white boy's whiteness because he can stand more of God's love and offers to protect the white boy. So I think the poem is to be joined with the Chimney Sweeper as an instance of Blake exploring this idea that while living in the world that we do live in, none of us is altogether capable of coming easily upon this kind of radical innocence that he's recommending. Nonetheless, we may sometimes glimpse it. And the little black boy too, as surprising and wonderful in some ways as his articulation of blackness being in some way superior to whiteness, something at the start of the poem you could never imagine he would think, nonetheless that isn't altogether complete. He's still damaged, as it were, by the racism of the society in which he lives, because having offered to shield the white boy from God's unbearable heat, he then says, "And then I'll stand and stroke his silver hair and be like him, and then he will love me." Although the black boy is able to make this kind of realization of his difference from the white boy being in some ways a good thing, nonetheless he's still kind of trapped in this thinking that the highest aspiration he could have is to make the white boy approve of him. So, well, we put it like this. Blake once wrote, "Unorganized innocence, an impossibility." You don't just return to innocence, you don't start off as innocent. You have to try very hard to reach this kind of radical, surprising sort of innocence. No one in these poems has actually made it. Everyone in these poems is in some way damaged by their society, like we all are maybe, but each poem gives, as it were, a little glimpse of how it can creep into our everyday discourse and everyday identities.